Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 61. And as always, I am going to start us off with a bit of a tune.
There was a soldier, a Scottish soldier, who wandered far away and soldiered far away. There was none bolder, with good broad shoulder. He'd fought in many a fray and fought and won. He'd seen the glory, he told the story of battles glorious and deeds victorious. But now he's sighing, his heart is crying, to leave those green hills of Tyrol, because those green hills are not Highland hills, or the Island hills. They're not Mylands hills, and fair as these green foreign hills may be, they are not the hills of home. And now the soldier, the Scottish soldier, who wandered far away and soldiered far away, sees leaves are falling and death is calling, and he will fade away in that far land. He called his piper, his trusty piper, and bade him sound a lay, a pibroch sad to play upon a hillside, but Scottish hillside, not on those green hills of Tyrol, because those green hills are not Highland hills, or the Island hills. They're not Mylands hills, and fair as these green foreign hills may be, they are not the hills of home. And now this soldier, this Scottish soldier, will wander far no more, and soldier far no more, and on a hillside, a Scottish hillside, you'll see a piper play his soldier home. He's seen the glory, he's told the story of battles glorious and deeds victorious. The bugles cease now, he is at peace now, far from those green hills of Tyrol, because those green hills are not Highland hills, or the Island hills. They're not Mylands hills, and fair as these green foreign hills may be, they are not the hills of home, because those green hills are not Highland hills, or the Island hills. They're not Mylands hills, and fair as these green foreign hills may be, they are not the hills of home.
Okay, that was a Scottish soldier from an excellent channel called Imperial Glory. Check them out. Welcome to my first guest this evening, Rupert August. How are you doing, Rupert?
Hello, doing very well. Trying to keep abreast of certain happenings.
Yes, aren't we all?
Yes.
Once again, guys, I think this stream is going to be, some of it at least, is going to be about what's happening in the Ukraine. And in particular, I don't know about Rupert, but from my point of view, I'd like to bring up some of the hypocrisy that's been going on there from the West. Like just before the show started, I was reading something where they were showing, and there were photographs to go with this, of very young boys, like 13, 14 years old, being trained to fire an AK assault rifle. And Jobu, who's in the chat, actually pointed this out to me, by the way. And I remember distinctly, like, back in the day, when we used to get very, very unhappy with African nations for employing child soldiers. Why is it okay in Ukraine? I'm sorry, I just don't understand. There's a huge amount of hypocrisy going on here.
Well, I mean, the issue there is that they're not bound to any particular consistent narrative. It's more just what the media class decides to justify and what they decide to cover up and where they decide to, who they decide to try and lionize.
Yeah, it's just entirely weird to me. It's not the only instance, of course, but I mean, we were talking before we started, Rupert, that there have been these ridiculous claims in the Western mainstream media that like 9,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in 8-9 days now, something like that, 10 days maybe at most. Which is absolutely ludicrous. I would be absolutely amazed if the Russians had lost even 900 dead, never know 9,000. It's just impossible that they could have lost anywhere even close to approaching 9,000 dead. Britain lost in 20 years of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan just under 600 blokes. Right? Now, you may or may not believe that the British Army is and the Royal Marines are vastly more efficient than the Russians, but they ain't that more vastly efficient, the Russians these days also have like plates, ballistic plates and this kind of stuff that soldiers wear. They may not be quite as good as the Western ones, but they do have them. Like I said, I'd be very surprised if Russia has actually lost even 900 dead, I don't know, 9,000. The mainstream media in the West is just believing every ridiculous propaganda claim that Ukraine puts out. Well,
I mean, to give the devil his due, not necessarily every unit might have the best equipment available, and that's the crux of the claim. So to try and understand from what perspective they're coming from, their claim is that it's mainly like conscripts and like second line units that are doing much of the fighting at the moment and doing much of the dying as well. So while they may have some better units that have really solid leadership, equipment, training, etc., that's not what the majority of the force is.
I'm not sure about that, to be honest with you, Rupert, and I don't think that any of us know. Look, Russia has a regular army, like a professional volunteer regular army of about 200,000 men. And to put that in proportion for people, the British Army today is a whole 80,000 men. The whole British Army, and that includes every cook, chef, and bottle washer.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's just trying to actually give some sense about what the other side might be thinking.
Richard.
Hello.
Hello.
This is my friend Richard, i.e. Sojo. Haven't seen him since Christmas, and welcome, mate. How are you going?
Not too bad.
Cool. We just started talking about Ukraine. I don't know if you heard what we were saying.
I haven't heard anything.
All right. Well, the first thing that I brought up was that Jobu, who you probably know, who actually might join the stream in a bit, was just saying that he sent me a thing where they're showing all these young Ukrainian kids of like 13, 14 years old being trained to fire AK assault rifles against the Russians. But I seem to recall us being really anti when the Africans were using child soldiers. So,
well, I can't say that I've heard that, but one of the things that one of my complaints so far is it's a number of things that this Zelensky guy has done, which is handing out weapons to civilians, teaching grannies how to create Molotov cocktails, and releasing criminals. But the idea of like a child soldier is not something that I've heard.
Yeah,
is that a development today, or?
It's recent, and there is film of there are photographs of these kids being trained to fire AKs, and they are 13, 14 years old. But I mean, given that, as you say, like I've seen, like there's the video that's been going around of this idiot woman in a car who Molotovs a Russian armored vehicle and sets an armor light as she does it.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is what's really like, and actually the Russians didn't even fire back at them. Apparently they are now starting to do so, but you can't blame them because, like, if a Molotov works, it burnt you to death. So, like, any soldier who fires back at someone chucking Molotovs on them, I don't blame them at all. I think the reason the Ukraine is doing this is they want the mainstream media to start screaming about Russian war crimes when they start killing civilians. I've been watching Sky News from the UK, and they're already talking about there being war crimes. They had an interview with a guy called Admiral Fogo, who was a US admiral, and he was saying that war crimes are being committed, that the Russians are taking huge losses, body bags are going home. The Russians haven't established any air superiority. The whole campaign's in the shambles. There's a problem with supply lines. So I really don't know what to make of it at the moment. It's so hard to figure out whether what's being put on the mainstream news is correct or not, because it's obviously not correct, Richard, because this was the other thing we were talking about. MSM claim is 9,000 Russian dead soldiers since the start of the invasion,
right?
Which is basically it's Ukrainian propaganda. But there's no way Russia's lost. I doubt they've even lost 900 dead, let alone 9,000.
Well, I mean, how many people died in Iraq altogether over 10 years?
It's
like 2,000 US soldiers or something like that. So
and Britain fought in Iraq and Afghanistan over 20 years and lost just under 600 dead. Yeah, it's like this 9,000 stuff is just absolute bollocks, and it's along the same lines as the Ghost of Kiev fighter pilot, which was a meme from the internet, and the heroes of Snake Island, all of whom surrendered and were well treated by the Russian Navy. It's
Well, I've got a list of the lies so far. So Snake Island, the nuclear power plant that was being shelled, which that turned out to be a load of rubbish. Zelensky scanned that a bunch of fighter jets were going to be delivered. All these MiGs were going to be delivered from Romania, and they never were. And then, of course, the idea that the Holocaust Museum was the Holocaust Memorial was bombed, and that turned out to be a load of absolute bullshit as well. So
when the Ukrainians have actual fascist type people on their side, but
Well, I don't know. It seems quite likely that the newest one that's been talked about regarding Zelensky, the 3 assassination attempts, that seems probably false as well. But
I didn't put that in my list. The morale is so low among the Kremlin agents that $1 million bounty isn't enough. They they forward 3 plots or whatever it is.
And who's that American politician who he's supposedly a Republican?
Lindsey?
Very gay kind of sort of guy, and he's actually been calling for the assassination of Putin.
Yeah, the neocons are going fucking apeshit at the moment. G'day, guys. G'day, Sergey. Nice to talk to you.
Jobo, I was just going to introduce you.
That's right, mate. My reputation precedes me and all that. But
it does. Yes, it does. Good and bad. But
with the propaganda coming out, I mean, there's a combination of people taking clips from old fucking war movies and putting them on Twitter, probably independently of anything more coordinated. But there's obviously a push to put out all this war propaganda to justify intervention, and that's ramping up as the neocon commentary in the States is ramping up with people like Lindsey Graham calling for assassinations and Adam Kinzinger tweeting out 4chan photoshops of Sam Hyde in a Ukrainian fighter jet and all that. So it's strange times.
Well, the thing that I keep noticing is, just watching Sky News, because that's the only UK news channel I can get watching from YouTube. But they just won't shut up about this no-fly zone. That's what they're begging for. But they want this.
But if they do that, that's war, Richard.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
If NATO jets start shooting down Russian jets, that's a fucking war.
What they're really begging for is a NATO jet to get shot down to justify an escalation, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, we've had people even saying quite openly, "Oh, nuclear war's all right. We could survive." I mean, these are the same people who won't let you have nuclear power stations, but yeah, let's have a nuclear war.
Who said that?
Oh, there's been quite a few, Richard. There's been quite a few of these MSM commentators have turned around and said, "Oh no, actually, we could probably survive a nuclear war. It ain't that terrible."
It'd be touch and go, but you know.
yeah. I mean, look, you probably get like 6 billion of the 8 billion people on the world killed, but you know, who cares about that? Because they want less people.
Well, one sort of wrinkle to this is that you can't discount the impact of 5 years of Russiagate as well for these libshit types that are writing articles like that, G.
Yeah, it's probably true, man. Probably true.
Well, there's also another angle that some people have talked about is that the Russians are kind of like an acceptable hate target, so it just gets out all of the anger that people have just generally built up. It's like one scapegoat group that you're allowed to hate en masse.
Yes, suddenly it's okay to call for the mass deportation of a certain ethnic group from your country. That's completely acceptable discourse in the UK Parliament now, coming from a Tory MP, no less.
Yeah,
even the Germans
try doing that as a British patriot and see how far you get. I mean, when was I don't know, guys. Particularly, I'm asking Rupert and Richard here. Have you ever seen 10 Downing Street lit up with red, white, and blue British colours? Because I never have. You know, rather than the blue and yellow Ukrainian colours they're lighting up with at the moment.
Oh, I think I've seen them do things like that for the Olympics and that kind of thing.
Maybe for the Olympics, yeah, but not for anything patriotic, really, because the Olympics.
Yeah, that seems like something I've seen at least once. I want to say around Brexit, maybe.
No.
I'd actually say that didn't happen at Brexit. The only celebration was the one that Farage was leading.
Yeah, it might have been for the Olympics for sure, but that's not patriotic in my point of view. From my point of view, the Olympics is just a bloody globalist sporting event from which they're chucking the Russians at the moment, just like FIFA's chucking them out of the World Cup. And Pornhub has banned the Russians. Well, my God, the Russians are going to suffer from that.
Banning Russian cats from competing in.
No Russian cats in cat shows.
I was saying to my brother, Jake, that all right, so Russia's been freed from Pornhub, Facebook, Twitter, CNN, and all the rest of it. Like, can Australia invade the Ukraine? Like, can we start up a petition?
Well, I was amazed, Jobu, at the number of people when this first kicked off who were turning around and saying, now, if only Putin could carry on and he could liberate Canada from Trudeau. I mean, that would be more realistic, to be honest.
Well, that's another slight tangent, but that's another thing that I've heard mainstream commentators saying that, he won't stop at Ukraine. Next, it'll be Hungary and Poland. It's like, hang on a minute, he's only got 200,000 troops.
Well, he's got 200,000 regulars. He's got a lot more conscripts than that, but they're not as well trained.
Well, they're trying to move away from that as well. They're trying to professionalize the whole army rather than
they would like to, like everyone is doing these days. But he still does have a reasonable number of conscripts. But he's got no interest in attacking Hungary or Poland.
To be fair, that was implied by the speech he made right towards the start when he talked about what was it, the dissolution of the Eastern Bloc or the Soviet Union being a mistake.
Yeah, I don't
seem like a shot across the bow of the Russian Empire.
Maybe, but look, like the Russian Empire did not it did include Poland, but it didn't include Hungary, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, of course. But the Baltics are like, I got a problem with the Baltics. Britain has 2 tank regiments, right? Only 2, and we have less than 250 tanks in total, including reserves. And one of them is in Estonia. Now, Estonia, the border of Estonia is 64 miles from St. Petersburg, which is the second city in Russia. Do you think the Americans allow the Russians to set up a base 64 miles from New York or Los Angeles? Because I don't think they would.
Well, the equivalent jokes the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we all know how that played out.
Yeah.
There was analog.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly the same situation reversed.
Well, yes, that's because they're adherents of liberal imperialism when it's out of their backyard, but when it's in their backyard, they're realists and believe in spheres of influence.
There was a really good bloke called Colonel MacDonald, I think.
Colonel McGregor. Yeah, Colonel McGregor.
McGregor, beg your pardon. I knew it was a Scottish name. He was on with Trey Gowdy on Fox, and he was the one American senior bloke because he was a diplomat, etc., who's turned around and given a really good take. And he was the bloke who said, "Yeah, this is pretty much the same as the Cuban Missile Crisis for America. It's like your enemy or potential enemy setting up right next to you."
And that guy's that guy's a player too. He was a security advisor to Trump in the final days of his administration as well. So
yeah, he's a bloke who's actually been quite up there in terms of like running this ship. So yeah, absolutely. But that guy, he gave much the best take I've seen from an American on this. Because he just said, look, it's like, if Russia or China wanted to set up a base in Southern Ireland, I hope that Britain wouldn't let them do it and would say, nah, do that and we'll fucking invade you.
So who was this guy? Someone in the establishment?
Yeah, he was a colonel. Jobu knows his name a bit more about him.
Colonel, I think it's Douglas McGregor. So he's a long-time DoD guy. I think he actually drew up the battle plans in the event of a war against Russia.
Yeah, DoD Department
during his career. Yeah, and he was after Trump started punching the neocons in the dying days of his administration, he was made a defense advisor or something. So he's in that milieu.
There was also that German vice admiral that was forced to resign, basically saying that we should try and ingratiate ourselves more with Russia and treat them with respect rather than, effectively that we should weaponize them against China instead of turning them into an enemy and sending them into the arms of China.
Yeah. I mean, look, on a global strategic scale, the West driving Russia into the arms of China is like total insanity. It's just totally insane. It's the worst thing you could possibly do.
Makes no geoeconomic sense apart from anything else.
Yeah, it's a bit like, when the Western nations drove Mussolini in World War II, who wasn't particularly pro-Adolf, babes, into Germany's arms because we went off about Abyssinia and who really cared who ran Abyssinia? And the Italians probably actually ran it better than the Abyssinians would have, but there you go.
I think that's a very relevant comparison, actually. It does strike me more like the Italy and Abyssinia situation, where I do still feel like, especially medium term, Russia is probably a declining power and not necessarily the big player in any up and coming major war. And so, in effect, what we've done is just force them out of the international community and into the arms of whoever will take them, which in this case is probably going to be China trying to prop up their raw materials intake, and the other group of outcast countries who aren't necessarily welcome in the American order.
Yeah, and I tell you the way I look at this, Rupert, and Richard and Jobu, you can tell me what you guys think after I say it. Every single person and group I hate is pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian. And I can't think of anyone I can think of one or two individuals. But apart from one or two individuals who I think are misguided, I don't know anyone who is someone I really admire who is pro-Ukrainian. Whereas every group that to me is anti-Anglo-Celtic and anti-Western is pro-Ukraine.
Well, what's that Carl Schmitt quote floating around at the moment? Tell me who you are, and tell me who your enemies are, and I'll tell you who you are. Yeah. There's a bit of an element of that to it.
What do you reckon about that, Richard? I just see like everyone I detest is pro-Ukraine to the max. I mean from Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Enslavement Forum and bloody, what's his name? The other bloke that everyone always goes on about all the time. And of course, all our global home politicians. And all of the mainstream media. I mean, like if the BBC is in favour of something, the Bias Brainwashing Corporation, it tends to make me not in favour of it, to be honest.
Yeah, but they are, these are the foot soldiers of the American empire. I think that America's played a blinder here, because who really stands to gain from this? Well, it's certainly not Europe. It's certainly not any European nations, but America seems to have done quite well out of this. So it's got Europe tangled up with problems with Russia. Russia's engaged in a war that's costly. Russia's been excommunicated from the international financial system. Europe has decided that it doesn't need the raw materials and resources that Russia has, despite the fact that Europe is incredibly resource poor. It's not self-sufficient in any primary materials, really, whereas the United States is. So not only has the United States got one of its adversaries, Russia, basically deplatformed as a country, but it's also got one of its economic competitors, primarily Germany, to say, you know, fuck our own economy.
Yep. No, I agree with that.
And the shutting down of Nord Stream 2, that's a big deal.
Yep, it is.
Well, the one thing that
that's not going anywhere.
And also now the Germans have committed to spending 100 billion euros on modernizing their army. So the Americans got everything that they wanted. I can't think of this going any better for them, really.
Now, hang on. I might disagree with that a bit in a minute, Richard. But before we move on, I got to ask Rupert what his opinion of that is.
Well, I was going to say the one thing that America hasn't or has lost out on this is they have pivoted back to Europe and away from, at least to some degree, from Asia, which is where they otherwise should be having most of their attention. So they put some more troops. God, where was it? Yeah, they deployed some more troops to Europe, and they've had to sort of guarantee certain Western European, territorial integrities and such, and re-guarantee NATO, when really what they want to be doing is moving slightly away from NATO, just letting NATO sort of wither on the vine and pivoting to their Asian allies so that they can try and contain China, which is long-term what they were doing until this.
I think this is part of that agenda. So they finally got Germany to commit to spending more money.
Yeah,
that was something that Trump was big on. You've got to meet the 2%. You've got to meet the 2%.
But that 2% is pathetic, Richard. It has to be said in terms of.
Those opinions aside, spending 100 billion euros over the course of 2 years on modernizing your army—that's a pretty big commitment. I think this is just the beginning. I think this is going to allow the US to pivot away from Europe. This is like them saying, "Bye, this is your problem now."
Well, good.
You're tied up with Russia.
Good.
But there's two sides to that coin, because it also allows Europe to pivot somewhat more away from the US if they have defense autonomy.
Well, yeah, I do. Sorry, guys, carry on.
I'll just make the point that it's quite fortunate for the United States that they have now become, or are on the path to becoming, the biggest liquefied natural gas exporter in the world. They've got a whole host of LNG ports being constructed, a whole host that have been approved for construction. And now they've got a nice market in Europe that is going to say, actually, we don't want that natural gas from pipelines coming from our neighbor in Russia. We'll get it shipped across the Atlantic. So like I say, I think they've played a blinder. They've got a market for their natural resources, for their gas. They keep Europe economically tied in with them. And, now we've got problems in Europe with Russia again. So I think this is just all gravy for the US.
Can I take the an alternative view of that?
Sure.
Can I just say that, Jobu, what we're basically hearing from you is Australian magpies.
Yeah, sorry, I'm out for a walk at the moment, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, no, listen, I love Australian magpies, and they're cute. They're cool birds, but except when they swoop you. But yeah, go on, man.
I was just going to say that like this whole situation represents like a catastrophic loss of face for the GAE, the Global Gay American Empire, or whatever it's called. So you had 4 years of relative stability under Trump, and as soon as a weak president comes in, Putin and likely Xi have seen their opportunity to take advantage of that, and they've basically cucked the Americans and NATO in their own backyard. As far as Nord Stream 2 goes, like I'm not sure what the current status is, but I haven't actually heard any reports that they're actually dismantling the pipeline. So while it's on ice for the moment, it's likely it'll come back. I think gasoline's hit $6 a gallon in California, so that's gonna work against Biden and the Democrats in the midterms. I take your point about Germany spending more sojo, but the sojo or Richard, would you prefer to be called, mate?
I think it's Richard.
I would prefer Richard, definitely.
Richard, no worries. I differentiate the quote-unquote Americans with the Trump administration in a certain sense, because they've obviously got two separate policy platforms. Germany's increasing its defence spending out of its own self-interest now. And the thing is, too, that there's a lot of other countries like India and whatnot that are lining up on the opposite side to the Americans as far as this situation's concerned. And we'll talk about corporate sanctions a bit later, Duke, but they're watching this response to Russia and the disconnect of a lot of different corporate services like Amazon, Google, and whatnot, and they're thinking that, hang on, this could happen to us. So I think that you're going to see a rise of parallel institutions to things like the SWIFT network and whatnot, and that has a lessening effect of that lessens America's power, because if there's alternatives, then the West can't bully these other countries as well as they do at the moment.
Yeah, all right. Look, my opinion of all of this stuff, like from the top, is that the Russian natural gas, and to a lesser degree oil, is very important to Europe, particularly when we're on this ridiculous, insane net zero watermelon green crap. That's going to come home to roost sooner rather than later, in brownouts and dead old age pensioners every winter because they can't afford to heat their homes. That is going to land on us sooner rather than later. I'm quite convinced of that. Also, Ukraine and Russia, between them, are about 30% of world wheat production. So you're going to have quite a lot of food price rises. And in addition, yeah, I was just going to say that, Rupert. The next thing is that the Russians have already said they're going to stop exporting this fertilizer, and there's already a world shortage of that. And you have all these lefty liberals in America and Britain turning around and saying, "Oh, well, that's just the price you're going to have to pay for standing up against Putin invading this one of the most corrupt countries in the world, Ukraine." Which it is. I mean, even the UN, which is totally globo homo and I would like to get rid of, says that Ukraine is considerably more corrupt than Russia is. So, this is not a good place that we're all saying, oh, yeah, that's, Ukraine wonderful, because it ain't. And it was created by the Soviets in 1922, for fuck's sake. That's how long it dates back to, really. So I don't know, guys. Like, I think we're going to get a lot of very high inflation, and we might even run the risk of getting the kind of inflation the Germans got post World War I, and America got to some degree in the 20s and 30s. I think we might even run that risk, particularly because the money machines have been going burr, burr, burr for the last 2 years over this bad flu that is the China virus.
Yeah, I've read reports of central banks raising interest rates to counter inflation, Duke. So, and that's happening in Australia as well.
Yep.
So that's coming.
Yep, of course it is. But I mean, it's not going to. I think everything's going to get a lot more expensive. Now, let me ask Jobu, Richard, and Rupert, how much has petrol prices gone up over the last 2 weeks where you are?
Truthfully, I haven't been paying too much attention to it, but it's definitely been noticeable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't give you a specific.
About 40, 50 cents a litre down here, Duke.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think it's about 25 euro cents here. So it was 125 and it's gone to 150, 148, 150. So yeah, it's gone up.
And the Saudis have already said they are not going to increase production.
Well, this is the other point that I was going to bring up, is that it does seem like there's a bit of a Middle Eastern pivot away from the US nestled in all of this. And so obviously there's the natural resources component of that, but they also represent a pretty significant amount of foreign investment at this point as well. So that's something that could be quite significant, especially if we're talking about the size of the Russian economy at present. If they get access to a large amount of capital, then that's, their industrial output could change quite dramatically, quite quickly, potentially.
Just one other aspect of petrol too, Duke. Obviously Trump had the US as energy independent before he left, and they scuttled.
And Biden destroyed that,
Yeah, they scuttled a couple of pipelines and whatnot, right? So you're seeing a lot of pressure against global warming policy in the States at the moment. Not everyone, but the higher the petrol prices go over there, the more calls there's going to be to restart drilling and ramp that energy production up. So, and they can talk about electric cars all they want, but
most people won't be able to afford.
Yeah, that's right. That's once again, that's going to hurt the Democrats in the midterms as well. So there's a couple of unintended consequences of this NATO expansion that's come home to roost with the current American administration. So
I believe that conversation has also been happening in the UK as well, around reversing some green policies for the sake of just actually having the energy.
Well, it needs to be, because otherwise we're going to be burying loads of very elderly men and women every winter because they can't afford to heat their homes.
Or alternatively, you just socialise that cost by giving out loads of subsidies from the government, and then that falls on everyone.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's just going to make the whole inflation and the rest of it even worse again.
In terms of elections too, Duke, the average man on the street isn't sitting on a stream waffling on about politics like we are, but they care about their daily budget, right? So if you start ramping up their costs, particularly their petrol costs, which is a very, very, very visible element of the household budget, they're going to get pissed off. And
also, Jobu, to be fair, petrol costs put up the price of everything because everything moved.
Yeah, that's right. So they're not going to be too happy come November if something's not done about this.
I totally agree. I mean, and then you've got Australia sent Ukraine, I think, $200 million worth of weapons. Now, I think it's perfectly reasonable for someone like Putin to turn around and say that's an act of war. If he wanted to, he could. If you send $200 million, and that's not a lot, by the way, $200 million of modern weapons ain't going to buy you a lot, but and lots of other countries, including Britain and America and many European countries, are doing the same thing. And if an enemy nation wants to do that, it's perfectly legitimate to treat that as an act of war.
Well, I believe they've already talked about the sanctions being an act of war, because, I mean, it really is just a modern blockade.
Yeah, it is. But, I mean, also, look at this is another thing I wanted to bring up, so it's a bit of a tangent, but look at the number of global homo companies, worldwide corporations, and people like FIFA and the people who run the Olympics and all these other horrible wanks who are basically our enemies, who normally are full-on Black Lives Matter supporters. They're full-on in favor of little boys being turned into little girls at 3 by their mothers if they're sick. And they're full on in favor of gay pride parades and all this kind of stuff. These are the guys who are saying, no, we're not going to sell anything to the Russians.
Well, I'll put a post on Gabjik that I sent you earlier. I come to this having spent half my life in a corporation, but these corporate sanctions that we're seeing over the last week or so, with all these different multinationals, like all the tech companies and God knows who else, leveraging their own sanctions on a foreign country, that's something new, I think. Like at least in terms of the scale that we're seeing. I think we're going to see a bit more of this moving forward. So I think at the moment it's pretty obvious that they're acting in coordination with the US government. Elon Musk had a tweet out where he said that he's actually been approached to remove RT from this, whatever Starlink is, and he told
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
But okay, so at the moment these are all being done in coordination with government, right? But as I sort of alluded to in that post, like what happens when these guys start feeling that they want to do this independently, right? So Bezos rolls out of bed scratching his balls one morning and says, right, I'm not happy with, I don't know, say the Philippines' attitude towards homosexuality, quote unquote. So I'm going to throttle their access to Amazon Web Services, or Google turns off Gmail or something like that to leverage their own punishments towards the country because they don't meet with their lofty values.
That's going to happen for sure.
We're going to start seeing that more and more, I think.
Yep. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I don't know if you, Joe, because he's also an Aussie, you might watch Franklin, and he did a stream earlier. He did a stream yesterday, Australian time, which he does once a month, and like he talked about this a fair bit actually.
Yeah, I caught a bit of it. Yeah, he did a really good video the other day.
Yes, he did. Yeah, that was a good one. I know that Richard watched that too because he spoke to me about it when we were talking on Discord a week or so ago. Yeah, it was a really good one, and actually, the Franklin was much more angry than he normally is, and I suspect it's partly because, like, he knows that what's going on now makes like the Chinese invading Taiwan much more likely. Because, the Americans and the Brits and the Australians and everyone else is being distracted by this shit in Ukraine, which doesn't matter a crap to us. It really does not matter who runs Ukraine to any of us.
Well, they're going to take advantage. They've got basically another 3-year window of opportunity to take advantage of Biden's weakness, right? Or the weakness, and not just Biden's weakness, but just the absolute state of the US government at the moment. Having just had its ass kicked out of Afghanistan too. So if she would be thinking, if I'm going to do it, now's probably the time, right? So,
well, it's certainly going to encourage them just because we're being so damn stupid,
I'm not sure that's the case. I think actually Xi's probably looking at this and thinking there's an awful lot to learn here. So, I mean, these sanctions are quite unprecedented. Being deplatformed from SWIFT, all of the sort of technological sanctions that have been placed on Russia, the fact that Russia's considerable foreign reserves were basically frozen. So they've got something like $600 billion worth of foreign reserves, half of which are now inaccessible. So you have to bear in mind that China has something like $4 trillion worth of US securities. So what's happened to Russia would probably happen in the event of an invasion of Taiwan. So I think that before they consider doing any of these things, that they need to mitigate all of those risks that exist. And that basically means breaking the dollar as a global reserve currency. So I think they're going to have to do that first. Otherwise, those $4 trillion of reserves are just going to be confiscated by the US and quite literally stolen.
Yeah, but let's remember, Richard, that Russia very sensibly has been buying gold for a long time now.
Right, but that only represents 20% of their overall reserves. And luckily for them, that gold is held physically in Russia. But all of those, but the other remaining half that is accessible to them is held in renminbi in China. Any reserves that they had held in the US, Japan, or EU, they've all been frozen. So for now, and that will be used as leverage against them. I'm just saying that, in respect of anything that China wants to do in Taiwan, they're now going to have to factor in those problems and try and find a way to mitigate them. And when you're sitting on $4 trillion of reserves, you can't liquidate that in the treasury market overnight. So, and then shift into another asset such as gold or something. It's going to be, I think, I look at this and think to myself that Taiwan is probably off the table for quite a while because of that. But
well, I very much hope you're right, because I think that's much more likely to actually cause a war. But although I think that would be a mostly naval and air war, but I think that's more likely to cause a war, because NATO is not, I don't think, stupid enough to get into a land war with Russia, which is going to end up in a nuclear exchange, which is going to kill most of the people in the globe. But, that's just me. I'm just hoping there's going to be sanity here. But I would say that I think that Russia has so many energy and resources that I'm not sure how Europe manages without them, to be honest. Particularly Germany.
Well, that's the interesting thing about this, Jake. So these sanctions are in effect actually punishing the citizens of the countries that
our prices are going to go through the roof. I don't think people have realized this yet.
Well, everyone's, unfortunately, just because of the way that the global market for all these things is integrated.
Yeah.
Just taking out any node is going to drive up prices everywhere because the demand's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, and much higher than people think that is going to happen at the moment. Like, we were always liable to get some nasty inflation from 2 years of printing currency while people weren't working because of this bad flu that Putin has now cured, pretty much, as far as I can see. But this is going to get far fucking worse.
Well, but the thing
because we were already on a bad path just by getting rid of all of our normal energy resources anyway, because of Alexander Johnson's wife.
Was anyone aware that Donald Trump was planning to actually build a pipeline to the Middle East, actually, which would bypass Russia, which Joe Biden cancelled as a day one executive order?
Doesn't surprise me.
I mean, it's really quite a hilarious short sight strategically.
Is that the Mediterranean pipeline from Israel? The gas fields in Cyprus and Israel. I think that's back on the table.
Yeah, that's back on the table now. Absolutely, it is, George.
But that's years off, and I'm not sure that the billions of cubic feet of gas per year is anything near what Nord Stream 2 would be. Because I know that the Israelis have got some deal. I mean, if you just look on Wikipedia, you can see that the Leviathan gas field can supply the Israeli domestic market for 40 years. What does that leave for exports? It's not clear, and they've got an agreement with Egypt to sell them some gas. So whether that, I think that's a red herring. Maybe I may be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to remember is that supplying this sort of stuff underwater is incredibly hard. I mean, it will be slightly easier in the Mediterranean than through other means, but it is still incredibly hard because of
much easier in the Med than the North Sea, George.
Yeah, much easier in the Med, to be sure. But it's not easy. It's not easy swimming making this stuff.
It's also like going the long way around. It's a hell of a lot easier to send gas from Russia into Germany than it is to send gas into Germany from the Middle East.
Mm.
From a strictly US perspective, they're sitting on about 200 years worth supply. So they don't even have to, in their own self-interest.
If America had a sensible government, and even under Trump, America was self-sufficient in energy, and it's not now because of Biden and the Democrats.
Mm.
But they could go back to that situation if they wanted to and could.
Yeah,
they will at some point. Yeah.
America geographically is just very, very gifted in terms of natural resources that Europe doesn't have. It has just about every rare material that it needs apart from rubber, and a few other rare metals that you would locate in Africa instead. So, but apart from that, they're pretty much set. So they don't. If they really didn't want to, they could be possibly one of the only examples in the world aside from Russia of quote autarky. But of course, they haven't.
Although let us bear in mind that Britain, for example, sits on enormous coal reserves that we're just not willing to use.
Same with uranium in Australia too, Jake. We're happy to export it.
Australia has
nuclear power plants are a no-no here. Yeah.
But that might change, Jeremy, with the supposed idea of Australian nuclear submarines. Maybe.
Morrison ruled it out, at least as far as it making it an election issue, Duke, because he doesn't want to actually stand for anything. But hopefully one day.
I highly doubt the Australians would do that because that would break non-proliferation. So.
Yeah, but come on, guys. This stuff's like we're going back to the Cold War again.
No, the global rules-based order. Huh? Yeah, everyone's paying attention to that at the moment.
Exactly, because that's what's dying here, and good because it was always bullshit.
I mean, to an extent it is, but like to the extent, like, are we sure that Western governments are going to comply with these sort of? Are going to start tearing up these sort of things like the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
I don't think we are, George. I think we'll actually get everyone killed first. I really do.
Well, yeah. I mean, and that's my point standing. Like, I don't think the Aussies will go into tap into their nuclear uranium supply because of that. Unfortunately,
maybe. Look, if they're going to have a nuclear submarine force, they really are going to have to. Really,
not necessarily.
No, there is no good way for them to do it without doing that, particularly when they have that stuff in their own country.
Does the Non-Proliferation Treaty apply to actually just building nuclear power plants? Or
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
It does. It does for specific harvesting of specific materials and then applying them into. This is why, like, Iran getting nuclear power was so unbelievably controversial.
For Israel, mostly, to be fair.
I don't understand. But it's still I don't understand the issue with Australia and uranium. What am I missing? Yeah. They already mine the stuff.
Yeah, they sell it to other people. Basically,
we've got a ban on nuclear power plants, Richard.
Yeah,
but it's
an internal ban.
No, but it's entirely understandable to me because what is the point of Australia developing nuclear power plants when you sit on huge amounts of natural gas, oil, and coal? When you have such a large coal lobby as Australia does, I mean, it does not strike me as being odd at all. And
coal's a dirty word, mate. Down here, we're actually
but you still have tremendous amounts of coal-fired power plants, correct?
Yeah, but we're not allowed to burn it, mate. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're closing them down at a rapid rate, Richard.
Oh, right. Okay. So there's a great irony there in the sense that all of these new mines in sort of Queensland get built and it gets shipped to China, but it can't be used at home.
Yeah, great.
That's pretty much.
Yeah,
exactly.
You've got it, mate. That's pretty much what happened.
There's a good quote from Barnaby Joyce where he said that coal's in Australia, coal's this evil substance, right? But there's a process where if you pass it over salt water, it becomes righteous. So he was obviously referring to the fact we rely on exporting all this coal, but we're not allowed to burn it here.
Yeah, like I said, like even Britain, if she employed modern technology, has a load of coal she could still use. And that is aside from the oil fields that are still around in the British part of the North Sea that are not being exploited, and fracking, etc. Exactly the same as the Americans, who also could do fracking and won't now because of this geriatric pedophile Biden.
Well, I think there's some controversy about fracking.
There's not much.
A tremendous amount of fracking companies went bust. The shale oil boom it's not clear to me whether that's actually sustainable. A lot of those companies went to the wall. They need incredibly higher prices. Well, they've got that now. So some of these fracking fields, these shale fields, and the techniques that they use when they pump in water and sand to get the oil out, it's not clear at the prices that they were. I'm not sure. I wouldn't necessarily blame that on Biden. I think that from my understanding of the shale industry, a lot of those companies.
Well,
he
closed it down. He just closed it down completely.
I don't think that's true, but
It actually is true, Richard.
I know he shut down the Keystone pipeline. That was that.
He shut those down, but he shut down all fracking in America. He just said no, you can't do it, illegal. And like we've got a guy in the chat here, Nemo, who's saying, "Cole, are we moving back to the 20th century?" Lol. What's next? Bring back VHS tapes and blockbuster video stores.
Yeah, I'm fucking down with that.
Yeah, but somehow or other, coal is like moving back.
To be fair, coal does have. It is not as efficient as other modern techniques. I mean, it's in terms of
it's
input,
not as good as natural gas. I'll give you that.
In terms of input, I mean, you will never get a more endless supply than you will get with coal, which is why lots of places like to use it. It's a very, very cheap, easy to access material.
Am I right in saying, George, that China at the moment is building like hundreds of coal-fired power stations?
They've slowed down doing that, but
not much.
No, it's a reasonable slowdown, but that's not because of any green aspirations. That's more just to do with inefficiencies of it. You can generally get a whole lot more bang for your buck using things like oil and gas, and even more so nuclear. Like nuclear power is basically the premium in terms of energy source.
Yeah, but you can't do nuclear power because nuclear power stations are so dangerous. On the other hand,
they really aren't.
No, I'm joking. I'm being facetious, George. Yeah. But the point is, on the other hand, the same people who say you can't build nuclear power stations are saying, yeah, let's risk or even do a nuclear war with Russia. This is how insane these people are.
Well, Jake, there was an article that said that a nuclear war might actually be good for climate change.
Yeah, it would, because it would kill like 6 out of 8 billion humans. I'm sure it would be great.
I mean, you gotta love it. I mean,
it would also kill most of the animal species.
Not even 2 months ago, they were telling you that inflation is great, and now they're telling you nuclear holocaust is great.
Yeah, and if you kill 6 billion human beings and only leave 2, you won't, absolutely kill like probably 75 to like 90% of the world animal species at the same time. You won't do that. No, the animals somehow will survive. It's these people are fucking insane.
Yeah, look, I think we're approaching a bit of a paradigm shift with this trick. Like, I know there's a lot of people engage in esoteric bullshit about which is the most efficient, which is the least polluting, blah, 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 source of energy. But the average punter like me, he doesn't care how the sausage is made, so to speak. He just wants cheap power bills. So,
well, I think the thing that's actually going to change that is going to be when people are faced with the non-guaranteed situation of actually having power in the first place. So once the lights start going off, then we'll have to put into question whether or not we can even access energy in the first place, rather than having multiple generations where that's just the expectation.
And if we carry on with this insane net zero policy that is all through the West at the moment, that's exactly what we're going to get, is brownouts. Because if all your power is so-called renewable energy, like, these bird slaughtering wind turbines and in most of Northern Europe, these things that take energy from the sun, which often doesn't shine, we're going to end up with brownouts because you can't store any of that energy at the moment, and there's no prospect in even the medium term of being able to do so. So, okay, if it's a windy day, or there's a load of sunshine that particular day, you might be okay. But as soon as it's like cloudy, or there's no wind, or maybe it's cloudy and there is no wind, both of which are perfectly possible in Northern Europe and happen all the time, you're going to get blackouts. You're not going to have any power, and that is absolutely where we're heading for at the moment. And our so-called political elites are totally on board with that. They are totally on board with it. And also, don't forget that the power that you do get is probably going to cost you like 5 times more than it does now. And that, again, is deliberate. It's what they're aiming for.
Well, if that is the outcome, then there's going to be hell to pay for it very quickly, because industry on any kind of, industrial production becomes impossible at those price levels. So
what industrial production do we do, Rupert, in the UK?
Not a lot,
days?
But I mean, across the West, if industrial production becomes impossible, and the only industry that can exists within an entirely separate economic sphere that we can't really access because of the sanctions that have just created 2 parallel world economies.
Yeah.
Well,
no, I totally agree with you. Whereas, Russia and China and Indonesia and India and all these other places are going to be sitting there with their coal-fired power stations, just doing what they do, and they'll still be able to have industry.
Yeah, exactly.
That is exactly where I think they're leading us at the moment. I mean, Richard, you look, mate. You're one of the most intelligent blokes I know. What do you think is going on with this net zero crap?
I don't know. I wish I knew, but it's civilizational suicide. I mean, what else can you call it? Yep. I don't know. I really don't know what they're thinking. I'm beyond guessing at this point. I think they're just high on their own supply. I think they are. I don't know. They're just so smug and so self-righteous that they think they know best. I don't know. I really don't know.
Duke, it's what you call forced adoption, mate. So ideologically, they want to move in this direction, so they're going to ram it through regardless. And if that leads to higher prices for the average planner, well, bad luck, because we're busy saving the planet over here. That's all this is, forced adoption.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
It's also the belief in the sort of the arc of history and endless progress, that no matter what obstacles we put in the way, that we will overcome them. This sort of technocratic, technological view that things will just keep getting better and better and better, and we're in this age of progress. And that actually, when you think about when they talk, the rhetoric when they talk about solar panels and wind farms and so on, they say, oh, well, the trajectory and the price is this way, and eventually technology will be as efficient as we need it. They talk about that in terms of batteries. And I say to myself, well, what if that's actually not the case? What if we hit a level with battery capacity where we can't go any further, or we can't drop the price per kilowatt for these batteries to the levels that's required? There's a lot of hope that we'll get to the point that we need to be able to store solar panel energy and so on and so forth. But there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. They're really sort of winging it in that respect.
Their attitude is, if we throw enough money at it, it's going to happen eventually.
Yeah.
But I remember reading somewhere that, like with a Tesla, that can only drive for so far before you've actually got to replace the battery, and that's like a 10 grand mechanics bill. But that's just completely out of the range of the ability of the average bloke to afford that. So none of these numbers make sense to me.
I mean, look, I don't think it's even that. I think that these people, like the people who think that, this will all be good and it'll be great, are the same people who think the Russians have lost 9,000 dead soldiers in an 8-9 day campaign in Ukraine. Like, they're morons, basically. George, you're not a moron. What do you think about this?
I genuinely believe these people genuinely believe climate change. They genuinely believe here's the thing. I remember back a few years ago, I was like, okay, I have no idea whether this stuff is true or not, because it's actually really hard to tell the truth. Because putting it straight, there's a lot of garbage science from both sides. A lot of people who genuinely do not know what they're talking about. I mean, two classic examples for me are probably some of the stuff that the NASA website put out about 10 years ago, and the other example is Tony Heller. Tony Heller doesn't make very good videos. I hate to inform people. Sorry. Because there's a lot of information going around, a lot of people can make a lot of mistakes, and the climate science is in particular something that's incredibly complex. In fact, most studying, most like there is an argument that the way we've been studying it is completely obsolete. Anyway, that all aside, I genuinely believe these people believe what they're hearing, and I'm not entirely faulting them for believing it, but they have definitely overinflated it to make it political ideology. I think humans naturally do that, unfortunately. But yeah, I again am struggling to fall into the evil overlord stereotype. I genuinely believe most people aim at good, and I do genuinely believe these people are trying to save the world.
But the political types, George? Like, do you think Alexander Johnson really believes the shit that his wife tells it? And it is shit, but you know.
Like what? I mean, what shit do you mean?
If Britain produces less than 1% of all global emissions now, and if we completely don't produce any emissions at all, it's going to make no difference effectively to the world.
Yeah, sure. Like that can get into very fallacious thinking.
No, hang on, George. We're British, all right? Right?
Duke,
and just as let me finish. We're British, right? Britain produces less than 1% of all the emissions in the world now. Yeah?
Okay, but Duke.
Nothing Britain does is going to make any fucking difference to this stuff.
Okay, Duke, but let's think about. Let's just dream up a scenario, completely fictional. Okay.
All right.
And we can. So basically, there are 100 people in the room, and each single one of them is given a button, and they're told that if not every single one of them doesn't press the button, then they all die. Okay. Now this is like fictional. I'm not saying that like kill us all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying people might think that. So the logical implication is you can't just say, well, I shouldn't press the button then. Because the obvious thing is I should press the button. Like,
well, if you believe them, yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't really make a difference if it's less than 1% or 100% or somewhere in between. It's still the same.
But if you're like an actual person living in the real world, as opposed to these 100 people in a university somewhere, when you've got like India, which has got many coal-fired power stations and is still building them, when you've got Indonesia, which has many coal-fired power stations and is still building them, when you have China that has got many coal-fired power stations and is still building them, it only takes those three countries to build, 20 coal-fired power stations to make anything Britain do completely irrelevant.
Take a drink when Duke says coal-fired power station.
Guys, can I
it just makes everything Britain does or Australia does completely irrelevant.
I'm not sure they think like that, Duke, because just a random thought I had was, there's an obvious contradiction in that we're implementing all these carbon taxes and whatnot, despite the fact that, we don't build anything and our emissions are quite low compared to India and China. But the way they're thinking, I think, might be that, okay, we've exported all our manufacturing activity and emissions to these other countries.
Which is wrong also.
So we're applying these taxes to ourselves to pay for the activity that's happening over there, because we build everything offshore and ship it back in.
But when you say we're applying these taxes to ourselves, what you mean is that our political elites are applying those taxes to our ordinary people, and we're going to have dead old age pensioners every single winter because they can't
That's
afford
exactly
to
what I
leave
mean.
their homes. Yeah. Like even in places in Australia like Victoria and Tasmania that have cold winters, we're going to end up with dead old people. This is my point. It's not only useless, it's worse than useless. It's just virtue signaling, which is what the West does all the time these days about virtually everything.
Well, if you think about it from a British perspective, what are the things that they say? We need to be a leader. We need to lead on the global stage. That's something that you'll hear time and time and again. We need to be a role model.
I agree, Richard.
Punch above our weight. All of these sort of cliched terms that come out. Britain punching above its weight. Superpower and soft power and all this bullshit.
Yeah,
you have to remember that these people all mill around in the same milieu. They all go to the same educational institutions. They all get employed at the same NGOs. It's one big sniffing their own fart session. That's what it is. They're just talking to one another.
But Richard, when I think Britain should punch above her weight and be a leader, I think we should send a warship and shell the fuck out of some bastard who's doing bad stuff to Britain. That's what I think. Is Britain? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Not like ruining our own people, which is what basically everyone. Look, I have this theory that what all of the Western elites want, including the British ones, and when I say elites, I obviously mean in air quotes because they're not really elites; they're scum, who have no affinity or any connection to their own people whatsoever. Is they want us to be like Brazil. That all of them, they just want the whole West to be like Brazil, with peoples who hate each other even more than the people in Brazil do.
It's very interesting that you say that, because a lot of people actually have, a lot of things that people talk about, particularly on the right, is that we're doomed and like full scale replacement and things like that. And that just always seemed a tiny bit cartoonish to me. And it seems like it's far more likely that you will end up in a Brazil sort of situation in which you have some serious serious stratification, serious sort of the opposite of one nation Toryism in its traditional sense. You get multiple nations within a nation. And that's the sort of thing you're looking for. You're not looking at a sort of destruction of the West per se.
Well, to me, it is destruction. No, look, George, I agree with you. I think you're talking common sense there, but I think it is destruction. Like a British Brazil, to me, would be a dead nation.
Well, it could go either way, because we do have some examples of total replacement as well, in the form of somewhere like either in Egypt or one of the Gulf states where they've got where the actual citizenry, the native born citizenry is like 1 or 2% of the population, and they're just completely overwhelmed with immigrants.
Yep.
I think Brazil would be a good outcome given the circumstances, because we can make jokes about Brazil, but there doesn't appear to be the same sort of anti-white animus there that there is in the UK.
You'd be surprised.
And still, if you're a white person in Brazil, you're probably going to do pretty well. And the people in the favelas are not white people.
Well,
I look at the UK
but
myself.
They probably started out, many of them, as white people.
Just a quick
Even
aside
in
on
the
that, I've been to Colombia, and let me tell you that they definitely see us as outsiders. But look, guys, I've just got home, so I'm going to dip out and hit the shower. Thanks for the chat.
No worries, man. And your Australian magpie background has been great.
I do try, mate. I do try.
They're lovely.
Thanks, everyone.
They're
Cheers.
lovely birds. Go on,
Cheerio, mate.
Rupert, what do you think, mate?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, even in the favelas, there's some rather, what would you say, based outcomes that come out of that sometimes, with various groups that are self-organizing where the state has absolutely no power. So you get things like church power increasing for forming like de facto militarized theocracies or paramilitaries that form and different things like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Braveheart says the elites will be behind their gay communities, and yes, they will. There's no doubt of that whatsoever. And Cilia Sodus in the chat says, there are 70,000 murders annually in Brazil, 70,000, which I can absolutely can believe. Yeah, look. As far as I'm concerned, the moment Britain is not a majority and hopefully a majority Anglo-Catholic nation, then Britain's dead. Really, like I would like I get people occasionally saying this to me, like, oh well, if Britain was like totally mixed, it was like 30% Anglo-Celtic and 40% Muslim and 25% African and all this kind of shit. Wouldn't you still think it was Britain? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't care if it was nuked at that stage. In fact, I'd probably prefer it was nuked at that stage. Sheepdog in the chat says that's inevitable, Paul Duke. No, it ain't. No.
I mean, I am loath to quote Orwell, but you might as well call it Airstrip 1 at that point.
Yeah. No, to me, Britain is Britain so long as the real Britons, who are the Anglo-Celts, are the majority. As soon as they're not, end of the story. We are getting perilously close to that stage.
I think even a majority is like 50.0.
Yeah, that's not enough for me. No, it has to be.
Yeah. I mean, even that's just perilously pathetic.
Yeah. No, it has to be a clear majority. It has to be like 70, 75%. Beyond that, I think you've kind of lost. You've been invaded and taken over, and you haven't fought back.
I mean, even in South Africa, they've got a lot of internal dissension amongst the white communities. So it's not as though they've all suddenly got into some kind of like racial solidarity mode as soon as they became a
but there was a lot of history behind that.
I know.
I'm also going to be rather controversial here and say that was mainly Boers. It's not a very Anglo trait to form huge uprisings about these sort of things. At least it's appeared to me.
No, look, I don't agree with you, George. Look, I've spent at this stage more than half my life as an Englishman in South Africa and Australia, and like South Africa was a mixture of Afrikaner and British culture with a frontier overlay on both of them.
Sure.
Where you had to be a tough bastard in order to survive, because frontier. And I would say that's probably true also of Canada and to a large degree of New Zealand, and it's also true in Australia. But Australia since 1945, or since World War II, I should probably say, is kind of like can't decide whether it's British or American. To some degree.
But concerning South Africa, concerning South Africa, who voted for the old regime? It was the Boers.
A lot of rural English speakers also voted for it, and a lot of city-dwelling Afrikaners didn't.
Sure, but
so
that's
not really true.
Sure, on average, it is.
On average, all right.
On average.
All right.
And also, it's not a coincidence that Anglos typically ended up in the cities.
But they didn't. No, that's not true either. Most of my South African friends who were Anglos were farmers in rural places like Northern Natal, which was like next to Zululand. It was close to places like Rolfstriftenis and Luana.
Sure, but like in terms of general data trends, it is known that in South Africa, the Anglos tended to move to the cities in the coastal regions, and the Boers lived inland. That's a fact.
Yeah, but it's an oversimplified fact.
Well, you can call it
Look,
oversimplified.
Pretoria, for example, was an Afrikaner city, right? But there were loads of left-wing Afrikaners in Pretoria.
Sure, but we're talking about averages, okay? Like,
yeah, but you've got to be very careful how you talk about averages, because you know this better than me, George, because I know you know quite a lot about statistics and all this kind of stuff, and like if you actually looked at the place at the voting, for example, when they had the referendum on like should South Africa allow Nelson Mandela to take over their country, which was ridiculous. If you look at the places where it happened, like Northern Natal was not a place that was vastly pro Nelson Mandela by any means. And Northern Natal had a lot of rural British heritage farmers. A lot.
Well, like, this is not the point I'm making, Duke. The point I'm making is that the general trend is that British people have historically moved towards higher population concentrations. They are generally much happier living in cities, and it is just true. I'm sorry, but it's true that the Anglo-descended populations are the most individualist and liberal people on earth.
All right. If that's true, George, why is it that like the great white nations outside of Europe were all sided by the Brits?
Because individualism has its own advantageous traits. Like, there's no coincidence that people became individualists. It also has its caveats, however.
But like, what I'm trying to say is, like, if you look at all of the great Anglo-Celtic European nations that were started outside of Europe, none of them were started by anyone but the Brits.
Sure, but
I mean, all right. I suppose you could say the Quebec in Canada, but that's about the only one.
Sure, like I understand the point.
And actually, to be fair, the Cape in South Africa region. But
I don't think you're quite appreciating the point. The point is that individualism is a double-edged sword. It allows you to create very powerful, rich economies because you can get individual action, you can get complex systems arising from that. The caveat of that is that the logical implication of you respecting people's individual integrity is that you degrade the collective integrity, and that's something that Britain has done for a long time. That's almost as old as Locke, and maybe even older.
Well, I didn't say I was ever a fan of Locke, but okay.
Well, you can say you're not a fan, but you cannot deny its prescience in British history. Like,
yeah, I think I could give you an argument there if we were to spend some time on it, but like, that's making this stuff a bit like, I don't know, it sounds a bit too like Sargon of Akkad to me, which I'm not really into. I like Sargon to me is like someone who's, he's moved 5 inches when he should have moved like 3 foot over the last, I don't know, 5-6 years.
Yeah, like if you, for example, give like different cultures, like you take a sample of different cultures and you ask them things like, should the individual have importance over the collective? My personal beliefs are more important than my family's, things like this. You will find, this has been done time and again, that British people are far more likely to say, well, my individual concerns are the most important.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's true, though, George.
Well, you want me to find?
Well,
I can.
No, hang on, mate. Well, let me finish. What I think Brits do is we put up with eccentrics very well. You can be an eccentric Brit, and most people will say that's cool, as long as you're not doing anyone any harm, no problem, right? That doesn't mean that Britain was a very homogeneous place for a very long time. Very, like, for 1,200 years at least, the people of Britain were pretty much the same people of Britain, with not many people coming in. And the ones who did were soon absorbed. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, yeah, okay, you could be an eccentric in Britain. That was always okay. So long as you weren't harming other people, that was cool.
That's not the point. The point is that because of course Britain didn't really change because there wasn't the historical grounds for that demographic change. You know, mass transportation, industrial supply chains, that sort of stuff didn't exist yet. So of course there wasn't going to be population scale migrations that were going to change the world when you already have an established society.
Yep.
That's not the point.
And a very static and quite well balanced society.
Well, the point is that once you have established the individualist society, it is necessarily, by construction and its psychological tenets, more predestined than many others to accept changes that a more collective culture would completely reject.
No, I'm not sure I agree with you. There was a British collective culture. A very strong British collective culture. I was talking on a Discord earlier today. Go and watch a movie like a film, I should say, being British, like The Cruel Sea, 1953, and the officers and men have an absolutely British way of thinking and doing things. And I know, for example, Richard is a fan of Master and Commander. And the story of the British officers and men in that movie is absolutely transferable to The Cruel Sea, which was made in 1953. The guys had quite similar beliefs and ways of thinking, and it was totally British. It wasn't American at all. It was British.
I mean, that's a film, Duke.
Yeah, I know it was, mate, but it's based on history. Like, I'm not going to give you a movie that wasn't fairly closely based on history. I'm not that dumb, all right? So if you look at that, they're really, and of course he is an excellent film, Kahneman. But if you look at Master Commander, that's a fairly accurate way of looking at the early 19th century Royal Navy. But the British sailors on that ship, even though both films were written by what would probably be described as liberal lefties these days, I suspect. But, you know, obviously liberal lefties back then were not as bad. And in the case of Master and Commander in 2003, it was based on a series of 20 novels that are like really highly regarded. So it's not totally inaccurate, you know. You can listen to Peter Hitchens also, who comes from a naval family. Like, his dad was a naval officer, Royal Naval Officer. And he talks about it even in some of his books. There was this traditional British way of doing things. But it was, yes, there was individualism. Yes, there was always an allowance for eccentrics. But there was a certain British way of doing things, which was not bad, to be honest.
Well, whether it's not bad or not is not the point. The point is that the constructed tenets of an individualist culture make it more susceptible to modern day human geographic ongoings. To use totally flowery language.
Yeah,
Depends on the way that you're
no,
measuring that, though, is part of the problem.
I get you. All right, I'm going to pass this over to some of our guests here.
Yeah.
Before I move on, though, I want to say, Nemo, you would prefer if Britain was nuked at that point, which by which he means when the real Anglo-Celtic Brits were the minority. That's insane, absolute humanity, pure evil. Well, in that case, according to you, Nemo, I'm pure evil. because I kind of would like that, because I reckon the real Brits would be on the real outskirts of Britain, and they'd be the guys most likely to survive. So there you go. They'd be up in the far north of the Highlands. They'd be down in Cornwall. They wouldn't be in the middle of the country. And do you know what? Right now, I wouldn't really be against nuking London, I've got to say. I think that would probably do Britain a great favour for the most part, because it's not a British city. It hasn't been for years. And I was born there. But yeah, and anyway, leaving all that aside, I'm going to pass this over to Richard and Rupert. What's your thinking on that stuff, guys?
Well, I mean, in my case, I would just wonder as to the quality of the data being used, because we've been ruled by Whigs for a long time now, since roughly 1688. There's basically been untouched Whig rule, more or less, and so how much of the culture is affected by this overriding narrative about ourselves, which is not necessarily entirely in keeping with how people actually act and how people actually think. So when you ask somebody in a poll to say, do you think that good thing, that the thing that culture tells you is good, and you say yes, I think good thing is good, how much help are you really getting? How much information are you getting from that, really?
Richard?
I assume you're basically saying it's revealed preferences versus stated intention.
Yeah. So if you start asking people today about questions around bigotry and discrimination, how are they going to answer in comparison to how they're going to act? Because a lot more people are in favour of diversity than actually live with it.
That's true, but they also but it's also not as lying as you would think. As a general rule, there is higher demand. There's just lesser ability to facilitate that demand to what we might call white flight among Leave communities than Remain communities. They just because they are the working class, not the affluent class, they have less ability to do that. Things like that. Of course, this is just of course, there's always going to be caveats with the information you have. But I am not entirely of the belief that culture is entirely downstream from politics. I think it's a bit more complex than that. I think there's probably a lot more interplay than people say there is. And so, in that sense, I would say it's more, the answer would be probably be more composite than simply saying, well, the Whigs were in charge and therefore. But
yes, no, but that's not quite what I was saying. It's more just about the way that the elites and the consensus culture, I suppose, has developed. So when you have one type of elite being overwhelmingly dominant for such a long period of time, that kind of affects what is what is seen as fashionable and what is seen as the good thing in society.
Yeah, I could ramble on forever about this, so I'm just going to keep my claps.
All right. Can I now ask Richard what he thinks about this? Because I kind of like Richard's takes. I don't always agree with him, but they're always intelligent, at least.
And I don't mean to sound rude, but I kind of zoned out through all of that.
Which is entirely fair enough.
It's hard to even understand what the quibble was to begin with. You were talking about South Africa and there being, despite there being two ethnic groups, Anglos and Boers, and being 10% of the population, they still can't get their act together and act as a bloc.
The basic thesis is that Anglo populations are typically, no matter where they end up in the world, the more liberal and more individualistic, and this leaves us vulnerable to, simply put, global homo.
Yep. Okay. That's a fair take, George. Thanks. What do you reckon about that, Richard? I don't really agree with it, but I kind of get where George is coming from.
I would say that just based on my own, I don't think I need any research papers. I can just sort of look with my own eyes and observe that as being a fact. It just is. I think South Africa is really probably the best example, where you've got, a white population that's sub 10% of the entire population, split between Boers and Anglos. And even then, in those dire times, those dire straits, they can't even sort of form a block, as measly and pathetic as it would be. So, I would have to agree with George. I don't need to see any sort of citation for, papers and whatnot. It seems pretty obvious to me.
So
it's sad to say, but that's what it would appear to be.
So, Richard, you don't think that even like, let's say 150 years ago?
Yeah, but there's a point. Who cares what happened 150 years ago?
Well, I do, because
well, of course you do, because you're Mr. Nostalgia. But I'm really only interested in the here and now.
No. It's not because I'm Mr. Nostalgia. It's because 150.
Come on.
No,
wet blanket and Mr. Nostalgia.
No, I'm not. No, I'm actually not. I'm actually one of these people who says you can't go back in time. But what I am is 150 years ago, the British people were actually the British people. Yeah? Do you at least get that?
No. I mean, the British people are still the British people now.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Not if you include everyone who's called British according to their passport.
Oh, but we're not. We know what we mean when we talk about who.
Okay.
Isn't. But a lot of I'll just say that a lot of the things that underpinned British identity and Western identity has disappeared and changed out of all recognition since 150 years ago. Christianity being one of them, which I think is probably that's a big factor in group identity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all, and you're quite correct. But what I'm trying to say is the real I do this all the time, and I say the real Anglo-Celtic British people, which I think adequately describes the actual indigenous British population. But 150 years ago, they were 99% of at least 99% of the British population.
What was the Irish migration into the UK?
I said Anglo-Celtic. I said Anglo-Celtic.
Wow.
Yeah. Look, if you want to come out with any Irish shit, you can do that. But look, all right, you can do that, and I'm not going to get in an argument with you about it. Although my mother,
I kid. I mean,
yeah, I know. So that's why I said Anglo-Celtic. So what I'm trying to say is that 150 years ago, the British population was Anglo-Celtic. And actually, I refuse to believe that in most of their major beliefs, the Irish were all that much different to the rest of the Brits. But anyway, I don't think they were for the most part. But certainly in terms of the rest of the world. But there was a British way of being back then. It varied according to your class and how rich you were, for sure, but there were certain general things about it which were generally true. This is why, like, a British warship in 1870 would have had officers and crew on it who would have all fought pretty much the same way, but when they were fighting the enemy. Very largely so. They would have fought the same way. When I joined the British Army in 1983, that army was basically, in terms of its thinking and its ethos and the way it did shit, it was pretty much the same British Army as 1950. And you could have taken any officer or NCO from that army or private and send them back to 1900, and they would have fit in great because it would have been pretty much the same.
Yeah, but I'm
all of that has now been destroyed.
I'm not sure that the way that the military interact with one another is an apt comparison for civil life.
Agreed.
No. But
it's a terrible comparison.
No. But hang on. What you got to realize about the military is, in Britain's case particularly, it was the last bastion of like real British behavior. It really was. It really was. That's why it's been feminized, is because you stick women in that shit and you destroy it all really quickly.
Yeah,
And
I disagree.
I know, I'm not just talking about the army. I'm talking about the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines, etc. as well.
I rather strongly disagree that it's the last bastion of British culture. I mean, I think there's still plenty
Yeah,
of some.
no, it
This-
used to be. It used to be, George. It did used to be.
No. I'm not taking this from a negative perspective. I'm taking this from a positive perspective because I know plenty of places which, for example, pubs in which you still get, the working class lads who come in from their trade jobs and have a talk about life, which is that's a pretty age-old British tradition as far as things go.
Yeah, but do you get the slut women who are coming in there and
No,
riding the cock carousel every evening as well?
I mean, my local doesn't do that. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of them that do, but like the point is that I still see bastions of like traditional stuff. Someone who used to be on the server, Gabriel, I think he appeared on here once or twice, can give you loads of stories about like.
Yeah, I know the dude you're talking about.
Yeah,
from Staffordshire.
I think so. Yeah, he's a solid dude.
Yeah.
He's a really nice guy.
I know him. Yeah.
But he can give you plenty of examples of traditional communities in which he's been with. Like, I don't see this as the last bastion of, like, the army is the last bastion. In fact, logically,
well, he isn't now. Let me be clear. It is.
Hold on. Logically,
not today.
Logically, as an arm of the state, it would be one of the first things you would target. That's
no.
just...
George, you see, this is where you don't understand stuff. It wouldn't be because it's the hardest one to destroy. And the only way to destroy it, because the only way to destroy it is to introduce women into it. Which
or
you
to do a
couldn't,
few minuscule defense.
but you could not do that 20 years ago. The guys would have just said, no way, it's not happening.
Well, I mean, I think it's actually pretty simple to see that how it can be destroyed because the government has been doing that for a long time. I mean,
they have actually no. The government.
Hold on. The government passes a defense budget cut, and what do the army say? They say, "Oh, that's a disappointment." Like you don't see any. Like,
that doesn't change the culture or the ethos. It doesn't. It just gets rid of a regiment. Budget cuts do nothing. It's not budget cuts. It's putting women into those units that destroy all of the unit cohesion that used to be there. And they do it very, very quickly because women don't get and don't like most of the things that blokes do in that sense. They just don't. This is I'm not having a go at you, George, because you're not military, so you haven't seen it. But budget cuts don't do fuck all. Budget cuts just like, okay, well that regiment's gone. We're in another regiment now. Or I know you know a bit more about the RAF, for example. Like, Douglas Bader was not going to be changed because a couple of RAF squadrons were got rid of.
No, I mean the point is that like the government can destroy the military if it wants to.
Yeah, and it has, and it is doing so.
Well, there we go. Like it's not hard.
But
to
it's
destroy.
But it was the last thing they destroyed. Is what I'm trying to get across here, which I don't think you're getting.
No,
I'm not saying there are not little bits of British culture scattered around the British Isles, because of course there are. There are absolutely, but the last bastion of like traditional British male culture was the armed forces, and the government has effectively destroyed that totally now. And I'm speaking as someone who served in it. My son's still serving in it, and he says the same thing. It is destroyed. Like this whole idea, like when the British task force sailed down to the Falkland Islands in 1982, not one sailor or soldier or Royal Marine or even RAF guy who might have been on there was in the least thinking, we're not going to win. There were blokes who were worried that, I might get killed, but no one thought we were going to lose. If you did that today, half of the Navy or the Army or anything else you sent there would think, I'm not sure we're going to win this. Because it's full of women. and women's ideas, which are totally anti-male ideas, which I know Richard gets, but I hope you do. Like, women and men do not think the same way. When a bloke walks into a crowded bar, for example, he looks for his mates or someone he knows. He looks at the mood of the bar. Is it happy or is there going to be a punch up? And then he looks at cute chicks.
I mean,
whereas when a woman walks into a crowded bar, the first thing she does in about 10 seconds, and I have had many, many women confirm this to me, is judge every other woman in that bar as to how attractive she is compared to them. That's what women do. Totally different to what men do.
This isn't received wisdom, do you? I mean, this is pretty common knowledge that.
Yes, of course it is. I'm not pretending to be Superman. I'm just pointing out obvious stuff here. And this is why women can't be in the military.
No one here. I don't think I've ever said that women should be in the military. I don't think you will ever. But my point is,
but if you were trying to run an efficient armed forces that would actually be able to do their job the best possible way they could do their job, you wouldn't put women in it. Whereas all Western military forces and all Anglosphere military forces are doing exactly that because they want that gone because it was the last bastion of straight white men.
This has gone a long way from the point I was trying to make.
All right, correct. Oh, you were talking about, I remember that we're all individuals. Whereas, Western
I'm not
military...
saying... No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Britain has... it's a big part of the old British ideological axioms that, it's a more individualist culture. That's just what it is. It's not that it should be or that that's a good thing, but it's what it is.
More individualist than who?
France, Germany, Italy, most of the rest of the world. Is the general rule.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true about Europe, to be honest. And I'm not the most pro-European.
We've disagreed on that. So I don't really see this conversation going much further. So we should probably hasten to talk about something else.
All I'm saying is, yes, Britain was open to eccentrics. It always was open to eccentrics because we do have that kind of free thinking thing going on. But the British Army and the Royal Navy and even the Royal Air Force, latterly, had a very distinct culture. They did. And it was a group culture. And it was, yes, there were a few officers. I don't think not many other ranks, but there were a few officers who kind of went against it a bit. And, you can think of people like Ord Wingate, for example, but there weren't many. Most of them went along with it all right. And you can say that's a good or a bad thing, but it was there and it was true. That's all I'm trying to say. And it's been destroyed by governments on purpose. As far as I'm concerned. Cardamon in the chat saying Duke is advocating for white Sharia again. Nah, sorry, mate. Never do. That's not my deal. Don't like it.
I think he's a joke.
I suspect he is. I mean, I like girls in short skirts and heels. It's not white Sharia. So, so long as the legs are okay, of course. But, so, but yeah, I don't know, guys. All I was trying to say, it was that the UK Armed Forces was kind of the last thing that was destroyed. And I'm not saying there are not bits of British culture around the UK. There are, absolutely there are. But in terms of a national thing, things like the Royal Navy and the British Army and the Royal Marines, the RAF, they used to be the kind of last bastions of British straight white male society, and they've absolutely been destroyed by the government, and it's been done on purpose. That's all I was saying. If you disagree with that, then tell me why you disagree with it. Pedro Garcia says short skirts and heels is degenerate. Anything above the ankle should be banned in public spaces. Well, Pedro Garcia, go back to, I don't know,
much.
1850, go back to 1850, man. Not my idea of fun, but you know. Guys, what do you, Rupert? What do you think about that? I really think that like the British Armed Forces was kind of the last thing that they destroyed, particularly under Tony Blair, as with so much else. But you know,
I don't know about the armed forces. I mean, I don't really have that much personal experience in that field, but it definitely seems as though up until perhaps Thatcher, maybe there was a good amount of older communities that were still pretty cohesive, and then maybe up until
there were,
well, yeah, I think a lot of these different pillars were sort of knocked down at different times, but bits of the aristocracy, the old aristocracy, were still hanging on until Blair, but I think they'd been dealt a pretty nasty blow after the Attlee government.
Yeah, fair enough.
The church has just been sort of degraded over time.
Well,
I don't know what other polls I'd suggest, but yeah, everything's just sort of died bit by bit since World War One, I suppose. Probably further back than that, really. But
yeah, I think World War One was a big turning point. But yeah, Richard, what do you reckon, mate?
Honestly, I don't really have a view. You just rambled on too long, Duke. I've just got lost in the moment. So.
Sorry, man. I do that sometimes. Forgive me. To me, it was so clear. Like when I was in the army, that was the British Army, and it was the same British Army that would have been around in 1950. And you could have taken any of us guys or any of our officers and switched us to 1900, and we would have very easily fit in because we had basically the same beliefs. Hadn't changed much at all, really. And they were very old-fashioned, very manly beliefs. And today, I even talk to modern British Army soldiers, and like they say things to me that I just go, what? Like, I just go, how can you possibly think that if you're a British soldier, you know? Like, how can I try and explain this without rambling fucking on? To be a British soldier was to be manly, and to be manly was to have a sense of humor, particularly in the face of every shit going wrong, because it often did. Like, you know, British Army radios never fucking worked, not even in my day, never mind World War II or beyond that. And you also, and so you had to laugh about stuff that went wrong. And you also had to be tough, physically tough. Like, you know, if something went wrong or someone hit you or you fell over on your face, you had to get up and not cry. Just manly shit, you know, normal stuff. You had to be courageous, brave. That was just expected if you're a British soldier. If you weren't, you would be shunned by everybody because you can't be a British soldier unless you are brave. You had to be, you had to understand comradeship. So, you know, your mate's your mate. The main reason you fight is because your mate's on both sides of you. And you'll risk your life for your mates up to a point. You might not risk your life up to the point of destroying the mission, but you will certainly, like, your mates are the most important people there. And you'll support each other always, every time. There's skill. you had to be skillful at killing people, which is kind of a core thing with the military. It's what it's all about. But you also had to have skillful fieldcraft, and you had to have skill with hand-eye coordination and this kind of stuff, which again is important. You were, back in my day, you were quietly patriotic. The Brits were never noisy patriots. They weren't like the Americans going, USA, USA. We never did that shit. Like we all had Union Jack swimmers when we went to the beach, but that was just a fashion thing. But we weren't noisy about it. We sometimes take the piss out of Britain, but actually all of us were basically quietly very patriotic, and were quite convinced that we were in the best regiment in the world, in the best army in the world, and utterly convinced of that. You'd never changed it. When you introduce women into any of those situations, you destroy it. Secular Koreanism says, Iron Duke 99 Iron Duke. Look how bored Richard is looking here and looking there, who doesn't get it about masculinity. Actually, do you know what? I think you're actually crap about that, mate. Richard is my mate, and I think he's a pretty masculine bloke. And were you to see my face, he looks like a slightly younger version of me to a large degree. So there you go. But yeah, look, that's my point, really, chaps. And maybe we can get the views of everybody on that, and then what's going to happen in Ukraine, and finish on that note. So Rupert, first, I'm going clockwise.
Yeah, I can believe that's the case. The only thing I would say though is that based on some anecdotes that I've heard coming out of Afghanistan and Iraq, parts of that culture still exist. It's just maybe the degradation has been even more recent than that. But yeah, I mean, it still seems like there's still that same culture of, especially among officers. I just don't know. I haven't experienced it personally, but I can believe that, especially because it's a fairly it's expected to be a non-political entity. Then there was a bit less of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was especially amongst officers. I think it's very true amongst NCOs and privates as well. But yeah, I agree with you about that, Rupert. What do you reckon is going to happen in Ukraine?
It seems like Ukraine is probably going to lose without any significant Western assistance. That doesn't seem like it's coming. NATO doesn't seem to have any interest in protecting anyone that's outside of NATO. So Putin will basically have his way with Ukraine however he wants it, whether that be to set up some kind of puppet government. I heard they were bringing back Yanukovych, maybe. So maybe they'll put him back in charge and pretend that the 2014 revolution never happened. That's one option. They might try and annex it. They might split it up into some kind of federal entity and give every region the opportunity to vote on whether or not they want to be part of the Ukrainian state. The new Ukrainian state, or part of Russia instead. Those are all options, but it doesn't seem like Ukraine is gonna win it.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. Pedro Garcia in the chat. How liberal is the British military? The British military, in terms of battalion, regimental officers, and the NCOs and men, is not at all liberal. But the senior officers, yeah, they're more politicians than officers for the most part, sadly. Richard, since you've come back, you've jumped up a place.
What was the question? Because my browser crashed, I suppose.
Yeah, no worries. I just banned someone who was slagging you off, mate. I didn't ban you. But anyway,
who would slag me off?
someone was saying you were gay, so I banned him because it was boring. But yeah, I get bored with wanks, to be honest. But what we were saying is, to finish up, is there anywhere for Britain to go now? And What do you think is going to happen in Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine is hard to. My impression is that the West and NATO want Ukraine to fight without helping them all the way, and not to do the. In my view, the right thing would be to just surrender, because Putin's demands are quite clear. He's made it quite clear from the get-go, and he wants, Ukraine demilitarized. He wants it basically neutral. I think he wants those two regions to be recognized as independent, and for Russia to have sovereignty over Crimea. They're ethnic Russians that live in that part anyway. A whole lot of fuss and bother could be ended just by recognizing these demands, which are, I don't think that the Crimea thing is already set in stone. I mean, that's already happened back in 2014. It's not like Crimea is not going back to Ukraine.
Never.
And from my point of view, it would be like if someone invaded Ireland and said, "Oh, we want the Republic," I'd say, "Yeah, take it off my hands. Take it off my hands."
So long as they were not a British enemy, I'd agree.
So I mean, I just look at the Ukraine situation and see it as being really an ethnic conflict in many ways. So be a neutral state. Don't join NATO. Be neutral. You won't even have to have a military, and Russia's going to be happy with that. I mean, what's the big deal? But I think
except for a lot of corruption in Ukraine.
Yeah. So I think they'll keep fighting, but I think that's the wrong thing to do. But who am I to say? If I was a Ukrainian, I might have different thoughts about defending what I perceive to be my country.
Do you really think they're going to keep fighting? Because I'm not sure even how much fighting they've done so far, let alone later on. I think it's been enormously exaggerated by the Western MSM.
Well, I mean, admittedly, the stuff I've seen on Sky News, you get a lot of people very patriotic and whatnot. But then again, if that was the case, why would they need to block men from leaving the country? So I don't know. But
that's a desperation plan.
I think it will continue, and that's a great shame. It's a great shame that there's a war on the doorstep or in Europe, but it's clear to me that that is an American puppet regime. So they've been played by the Americans and NATO, really. As Mearsheimer said, they've been sort of led down this sort of crimson path, led to believe that they would have NATO membership when it was never on the cards. I think it's terrible.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I think they'll keep fighting. And then the broader question about Britain, what do you mean in the context of Ukraine, or?
Well, were we always this individualist place that never had some kind of group think about what it meant to be British, which I don't agree with.
Hold on, that's not the case. That's not what I said.
Right, and that's not what George was saying.
Well, that was the impression I got.
No. There, fundamentally, Britain is not. It's not that it has no collectivist tenets. It's that it is axiomatically more individualist than other cultures.
Sure, I'm not going to disagree with that, but I think there was a very broad idea of what Britain really meant, certainly up until maybe the 1950s.
Yeah, sure. But even to use perhaps something you would agree is a pretty canonical representation of British culture, The Lord of the Rings. The victory of the Lord of the Rings was eventually achieved by an individual, Frodo Baggins, and his friend Samwise. Wow. It was not achieved by an army. And
I disagree with that, because unless the armies had won all their battles, what he did in the end wouldn't have mattered.
No, actually,
he would. No, actually,
you are critically wrong about.
I know you are. I've just thought about it. But what I'm saying is, had he managed that in the end, how would he have managed that without all the victories that were won in the various wars? because he wouldn't have even got there. There would have been too many people for him to even get past.
Okay, we're just going to disagree on that. The point was, and the general thrust of what I was trying to say is that British culture has this huge belief in individual, and that the individual is what makes the difference. And like, I mean, there's only so many millions of ways I could put it. I mean, I know that particularly in dissident right circles, people are very loath to discuss empirical evidence. So I can relate it in anecdotes. I can relate it in many umpteenth ways. The important thing is, however, is that British people are more collectivist.
You mean
not individuals?
You mean less collective?
Less collective.
Literally, what does it even matter? I mean, you can take Germany and the UK and France, and they've all got a different flavour of the way that they're governed and sort of the cultural makeup of the people. We're all in the same boat, so it's a moot point as far as I'm concerned. Which one is the more liberal? We're all in the same boat, so what does it matter?
To an extent, I would say that Britain and Anglo cultures have been more vulnerable. Like, for example, France in particular has had a much stronger reaction with Zemmour and Le Pen than you've seen.
They're also further down the path to the things that everybody hates.
Yeah,
true.
That's true.
True.
Yeah.
So swings and roundabouts. And
French Revolution, don't forget.
Well, more urbanized as well as was one of the big problems.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is why I brought up the British Armed Forces, is because they were a group of Brits with absolutely slightly away from the civilian way of thinking, culture, and ethos. That was really what I brought them up for, because they were different, and they were different for a very long time. And they're not anymore, because they've introduced enough women that it's been destroyed to a large part. Now, all right, I think Rupert said that, yeah, there are bits where it still survives, but less and less, mate. Less and less. That was all I was trying to say, George. It was like that. I wasn't trying to say, okay, British Armed Forces is representative for Britain. What it was a bit more representative of was traditional straight white men, if you like.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's probably a fair characterization. Like a tradition. If I put it as what you're trying to say is it's the last respected institution in which traditional male behavior was encouraged and respected.
Yep.
I think that's a pretty reasonable characterization.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, but I mean, I would agree that you can find some pretty small and nebulous places in which you find masculine behavior in Britain, but in general, it is no longer the rule. I mean, I'm a student, and I could probably count the amount of men male friends I have who've been in a fight on one hand. So
Jesus,
so
you're like what, 20, 21?
I'm 21.
Yeah. Fuck me. Mind you, I joined the army at 18, so that tends to get you in quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, students is probably not the best group of people to meet.
I don't think students, even when I joined the army in '83, would have been in a fight every week. But bet it would have been more. It would have been more than 3 or 4 in 5 years. But
yeah,
because apart from anything else, fights in pubs back then were more acceptable than they are now. It was perfectly possible to get in a fight back then, and the landlord didn't call the police unless anything was being smashed, of course. I think people find hard to believe these days, but actually back then, if 2 blokes were having a punch up somewhere in the bar and nothing was being smashed, the landlord often would not call the police. Why would he? he didn't want the cops to come in there and chuck all his customers out. So long as these two dudes weren't smashing anything, why did he care? He didn't. It was a pub. People got drunk. There were women there, and there were going to be fights. That's just the way the world works, and always has. Probably going back to, like, I don't know, Sumerian culture in the however many years BC it was.
Yeah. I think that's probably a pretty good point for us to reach actually some agreement on.
Yeah,
like
no worries. So, what do you reckon is going to happen in Ukraine, George?
Oh, a war is never properly analysed until 100 years later. So
well, at least until a few months later. Anyway, yeah, for sure.
Like you get so much sort of information, like the Russians have had embarrassing logistics, terrible orders, things like that. We don't even know the units that the Russians are using for the main part.
No.
Like whether they're using their conscripts or not. I do not know. Is the long and short of it. I can make. I think probably in all circumstances, if this attack is repulsed, which I think is unlikely, Putin will commit the reserves and they'll deal with Ukraine within a matter of the rest of the month. Yeah, I do not think that we're in for a long war. I don't think Ukraine has a hope in hell of winning this. I think Ukraine could possibly, unlikely, but possibly fight to a stalemate. But even that, I think, is a bit generous.
Yeah, won't disagree with any of them.
Yeah. Apart from that, there's not much really to be said. So,
all right, gents.
Well, I don't know. I've just reading the news, and it says that the Israeli PM is on manoeuvres. He's flown to Russia to meet Putin. He's debriefed Zelensky, and now he's flying to Berlin. Is he trying to broker a deal? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if there's anyone that's going to bring peace to this conflict, it's the Israelis, because they
peace in our time.
He's going to wave a piece of paper and say, peace in our time. But yeah. All right, guys. Before we close with our usual tune, anything you want to share or any final thoughts? Starring Richard.
No, nothing from me. Just have a nice weekend.
No worries, mate. Go well. George?
Not really. I hope everyone has a good Sunday. Apart from that, how much as it was.
No problem. River?
Only thing I do have to shill is another article on Praxarchy that I wrote called Questing for Imperium. I can pass along a link for that.
Yeah, put it in if you put it in the private chat, I'll stick it on the comments so people can go and check it out, mate. Okay, here we go. Let's do that. Oh, hang on. There we go. Mine web, hail victory. Get fucked. Honestly, I'm no fan of Richard Spencer, I've got to say. All right, guys, I'm going to play us out with a tune, as I always do. StreamYard requires clicking on tiny tabs.
and strike home, revenge, revenge, our country's wrongs. Britain, strike home, revenge, revenge, our country's wrongs. Fight, fight and record, fight, fight and record yourselves in through songs. Fight, fight and record, fight, fight and record, record yourselves in through songs. Fight, fight and record, fight, fight and record yourselves in through songs. Fight, fight and record, fight, fight and record, record yourselves in through songs.
Okay, that was Britain Strike Home by Henry Purcell from the 18th century. Thank you very much to my guests, Rupert August, Richard Sojo, and also George, aka Aussie. Thank you very much for coming on, and we will see you next week. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content, and please, if you like what we said today, hit the like button. And we'll check you soon. Go well, folks, and take care.
Good night, all.